If the Declaration of Independence was 1776 and the Constitution was 1789, and if George Washington's first term started in 1789, who was the leader of the United States for 13 years between 1776 and 1789? I learned the answer to this question from Prince. Yeah, Prince, the symbol, or the artist. He was on the Tavis Smiley show talking about chemtrails after he saw Dick Gregory talk about chemtrails, manganese, and malt liquor conspiracy theories on the state of the Black Union. And in the video, he mentions that he found out there were 8 presidents before George Washington.
When I found out there were 8 presidents before George Washington, I wanted to smack somebody. You know, I wanted to know why I was taught otherwise. Just tell me the whole story. I'll fill in the blanks.
I think I also recall him saying that Barack Obama wasn't the first black president. So I started looking this stuff up and found out there were 14 presidents before George Washington and 7 black presidents before Barack Obama.
Genocide. Noun. The systematic killing of substantial numbers of people on the basis of their ethnicity, religion, political beliefs, social status, or other particularities. Genocide. Verb. To commit genocide against, to eliminate, a group of people completely.
Hello America, Tom Hand here with Americana Corner. Today we're discussing the Sullivan Expedition of 1779. In the spring of 1779, General George Washington developed a plan to strike deep into the heart of the Iroquois nation. Washington recognized he must destroy the bases which the Indians used to launch their raids, or the depredations would never cease and the settlers would never return to the Mohawk Valley. Washington assigned some of his best regiments to this mission and gave the command to General John Sullivan. On August 26th, Sullivan led his force of 4,000 men up the Susquehanna River from the Wyoming Valley into the Iroquois homeland, destroying any Indian settlements they encountered. 3 days later, as the Continentals approached the Indian village of Newtown, they were attacked by 1,000 Loyalists and Mohawks led by Joseph Brant, furious that the Americans dared to invade their territory. The veteran Continentals repulsed the assault, and although only about 40 Indians were killed or injured in the fighting, the defeat seemed to crush their spirit. With the morale of the Indians broken, Sullivan's advance into the Iroquois heartland was relatively unopposed. In keeping with General George Washington's instructions, no Indian women or children were assaulted during the expedition. Unfortunately, their time to suffer, like that of the Americans driven from the Mohawk Valley, would come during a long, cold, hungry winter. The Continentals moved quickly, and by September 15th had made the area largely uninhabitable for the natives. In 3 short weeks, the Sullivan Expedition destroyed 40 Indian towns and 160,000 bushels of corn and broke the back of the Iroquois nation. Next week, we'll discuss the aftermath of the Mohawk Valley War. Until next time, may your love of country lead you.
George Washington is often celebrated as a heroic leader and the father of the nation, but a darker side of his legacy remains untold. Washington was one of the largest slaveholders in Virginia, owning hundreds of enslaved people at his Mount Vernon estate. Despite fighting for American independence and liberty, he enforced strict discipline and harsh punishments on his slaves. As president, he signed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, reinforcing the institution of slavery. Washington even took measures to prevent his slaves from escaping to freedom, demonstrating his commitment to preserving his wealth and property over human rights. While he eventually provided for the emancipation of his slaves in his will, it was a decision that came too late for many. This untold story complicates the traditional heroic narrative of America's first president.
What it was like to be a slave at George Washington's Mount Vernon. The slaves were expected to work from dawn until dark. They lived in tiny quarters that promoted illness. Washington bought teeth from his slaves. Dozens of slaves tried to escape from Mount Vernon. Washington rounded up the slaves' dogs and hanged them. Even white people saw Washington as a harsh master. Washington suspected his slaves of stealing and plotting escape. Slaves lived in small communities at Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon was home to hundreds of enslaved people. The slaves labored 6 days a week. Enslaved people at Mount Vernon frequently resisted. When Washington died, he freed his slaves. Sort of.
So moving on to the next brunette woman, you may find this one very interesting. All right, so this second article comes from the Harvard Herald, dated February 17th, 1893, page 6. This article is titled The Washington Family. All right, so I'm going to start reading where it states, Martha Dandridge was a beautiful and a Virginia belle. When at 17, she married Daniel Parke Custis. Of their 4 children, 2 preceded their father to the tomb, and when the widow Custis married George Washington in 1759, she had but a son and a daughter. History gives us a few exquisite glimpses of the home life of Washington for the next few years. He and his wife were very nearly of the same age, both born in 1732. Both were wealthy, refined, and of the highest standing among the Virginia contemporaries. Washington loved the 2 children of his own. There was nothing to mar their domestic life. But in 1773, Martha Parke Custis died, and Washington was long affected with a strange restlessness. Indeed, his domestic life never again seemed so calm till after the Revolution. Martha was sometimes called the Dark Lady or Dark Beauty because of her brunette complexion. But she was both beautiful and amiable. All right, so that's the part of the article that I wanted to read to you. Let's see if you caught these 3 facts. The first one being President George Washington had no biological children. I didn't realize that. The second one was that Martha Washington was sometimes called the Dark Lady or Dark Beauty because of her brunette complexion. Let that sit with you for a second. Presently, calling someone dark anything is considered a negative term. However, back in the 1700s, Dark Lady and Dark Beauty was a compliment. Why? Because most women were a shade of brown, especially the elite. All right, and then the third is that President George Washington's wife, the First Lady, was a woman of color.
This mansion belonged to America's first president, George Washington. He called it home. Now visitors can see the humble abodes that housed Mount Vernon's many slaves just next door. After a 10-month restoration, the slave quarters have been reopened for the public. They are 2 wings that George Washington added on to the Mount Vernon greenhouse shortly after becoming president. They're divided into 4 large rooms, including one for men and another for women. Each room was heated by a fireplace. At the dedication ceremony, archaeologist Dennis Pogue said the restoration was the result of more than 20 years of research. He said the clothes, utensils, cups and glasses, brooms and baskets used by the slaves were also reproduced.
We have a lot. Archaeological materials that we've excavated from the slave quarter site. And from that, we know the kinds of things that they were actually, using, the ceramics that they were eating from, and the food remains. I found lots of animal bones, so we know that they were eating lots and lots of wild animals, that they were, augmenting the rations that they were getting from the Washingtons.
These items bring to life the lifestyle of the craftsmen, cooks, servants, and farm laborers who were owned and worked on the Virginia estate for free.
We have some descriptions of what these quarters look like, and they describe them as huts, and they say that they're more miserable than anything that you can imagine. And I think that we don't want to whitewash this part of the story. These folks were owned by other people. They had no rights of their own, and they were doing hard work.
Genocide. Noun. The systematic killing of substantial numbers of people on the basis of their ethnicity, religion, political beliefs, social status, or other particularities. Genocide. Verb. To commit genocide against, to eliminate, a group of people completely.
This is the woman who defied George Washington by escaping his enslavement and taking her freedom into her own hands. Ona Judge was one of hundreds enslaved by the Washingtons. At 10 years old, she became Martha Washington's personal slave, with her at all times. In 1796, when the Washingtons decided to give her away as a wedding gift to their granddaughter Eliza, Ona made her break for freedom. She slipped out and into hiding onto a boat called the Nancy and up the coast. An advertisement with a reward for her capture quickly appeared. It read, "Absconded from the household of the President of the United States, Ona Judge, a light mulatto girl, much freckled, with very black eyes and bushy black hair. She is of middle stature, slender, and about 20 years of age." To avoid bad press, the Washingtons began pretending Ona was kidnapped, not run away. Upon hearing she was taking refuge in New Hampshire, George quietly sent people to force her back illegally, but Ona evaded every attempt. She would live her life free for 52 years, marry and have 2 daughters, Eliza and Nancy.